Hi, everyone. Let's get started. I want to first introduce Gerta, and then I will talk to you about Founders Bay. Gerta here, she's a negotiation expert. She's from MIT. She co-founded Inception Studio. I mean, there's nothing that she did not do. I'm so excited that she's giving this workshop for us. Gerta, please take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. The structure today will be, I'll go over some slides on negotiations for founders, and then we can open it up to Q&As. I call this presentation Win Your Negotiations for Founders. You don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And just a quick, when we say win, my idea of negotiations is where we have win-win. Both parties win, or at least one party wins and the other party doesn't lose. But we'll get to that shortly. Going over my background, I was trained by experts from MIT and Harvard Law School. I have a logistics engineering from MIT and a degree in math from Wellesley College. I have 10 years of experience, over 10 years that span big techs. I worked at LinkedIn, IBM, at salary.com, there, global biotech. I saw someone in the chat has a biotech company, if I understood correctly. I've been a VC-backed founder. I've advised startups. And I've also worked in venture capital at South Park Commons, if you've heard of it. In terms of my own entrepreneurship, I'm currently the co-founder of yournegotiations.com, which I run with my husband, Alex, who will join shortly. He's on another call. His background is super cool too. He was in the Air Force, in the US Air Force. He worked for the Air Force for 5 years. He's worked at hypergrowth startups, worked at Meta as well, been a founder as well. So he has a very complementary background to mine. I also co-founded Inception Studio, an incubator and community for founders and engineers building with generative AI. I'm not involved with it anymore, but they've started a fund. I'm very close to basically founders and startups. I also co-founded Vibe. This is the venture-backed consumer social mobile app. We were trying to tackle the loneliness crisis, which is not very easy to tackle, especially with a VC-backed angle, as some of you may know. And a long time ago, I co-founded this mobile app, Delphi, that uses behavioral sciences to help users make better decisions. In terms of startup mentorship and engagement, I'm a mentor for Techstars, Founder Catalyst, a judge and business mentor for Mass Challenge Health Tech. The health tech crowd might know about it. I also mentor EU for Innovation, fellow of OnDeck cohort, ODF9, if anyone is from OnDeck, and a lot of community building and a lot of initiatives. This is just to show you I've touched startups from starting my own. Now we're bootstrapped. I've been venture backed. I've advised startups. I've helped startups in studios in various ways. So I understand this space really well. I know some of you in the audience, you don't necessarily have your own startup, which is obviously fine. In our company, yournegotiations.com, we added the .com in the name. We help people negotiate business deals, so a lot of founders, but also people who are negotiating in their careers, at their jobs. We also help people negotiate job offers. That's actually a very big part of our business. So I'm happy to talk about that if it's of interest for this crowd. We can just get to it during the Q&A. One thing that might not be very apparent, especially if you're not the business co-founder, maybe you're the technical co-founder. A lot of people don't realize that as a founder, you're negotiating all day, every day, whether you're aware of it or not. Here's a startup negotiation journey. First, at the very beginning, you're negotiating with your co-founder, whoever it is. I mean, my co-founder is my husband, not my current co-founder. At the VC-backed startup, it was a friend. But even with my husband, we had to have that conversation. Okay, how are we splitting this? Because I was working part-time. He was tinkering with some other ideas at the very beginning, which was a few years ago. So step one, you're negotiating with your co-founder, as simple as equity, which is, very obvious. But there's also focus areas. It might not be very obvious. Yes, one co-founder might be technical, the other might not be. So obviously the non-technical co-founder is not going to do engineering. But what about product? At my VC-backed startup, my co-founder was technical and had a lot of experience in engineering. I was sort of more of the business co-founder, even though I have a technical training, but we both wanted to do some product and direction and strategy. Those are things to talk about. You want to talk about leadership. Some people feel strongly about being the CEO. Some people don't. You talk about lifestyle. Are we going to work 24/7, all waking hours, nonstop, maybe until we raise, maybe forever, or we're going to take the weekends off, or we're going to take some evenings off, who knows? Compensation, are you going to take any compensation? We had to have this conversation with my last co-founder. We fundraised and we were thinking, well, okay, do we pay ourselves? And if so, how much? And those are very important conversations. And then, of course, the obvious one that a lot of people think about when they think of startup negotiations is with investors, that you're negotiating equity. The obvious one, which is tightly related to valuation, but then another important one is board seats and control. Like, how much say do the investors have? That is a very delicate matter. Then you're negotiating with potential employees. So you start hiring or even part-time or contractors. While cash versus equity is the obvious one, there's benefits. I remember at a generative AI startup that I was advising for last year, we had to think about, do we offer 401k? We've only raised like seed, pre-seed, seed. Do we offer 401k? That's things to think about. And then ownership areas. When you're so early, the startup is very early stage, it's not super clear when you hire someone, which area are they responsible for exactly, and will that change over time? Even our small bootstrap company, my current company, yournegotiations.com, we had a contractor helping us with various things, and we're like, well, do we allow him to take our sales calls? And if so, do we change how we pay him? So actually, even though we're not VC back, we offered some form of rev share so that he would have skin in the game. So these are things to think about, like your incentive mechanisms. What can you work with? What are your constraints and all that? Other negotiations to think about in the early stages, but actually this one applies at all times. You might have consultants and advisors at your startup, and so you're negotiating with them again, what kind of compensation, like cash versus equity or a combination of both, and what type of time investment. I was a consultant, like I said, for a generative AI startup a couple years ago, and I had to think about, well, what's my time commitment? And it's tricky because with startups, even if you say I'll work, I don't know, a couple hours a day, so let's say I'll work half days, but then a request comes in and things are so time sensitive and it's such an early stage startup that what am I going to say? No, I'll get to this, in 3 to 5 business days. You kind of have to do it anyway. So you as the founder have to think about that. And if you are a consultant and advisor, you also need to think about that and sort of the boundaries and what's realistic. Realistically, it will be really hard to say no to a request that comes in from a startup, even though you've agreed to something else. It's not realistic that they will just wait the week for you to come back online. Like I said, cash versus equity or a combination of that, as well as time investment. And then you have your direct reports. This is different from potential employees because potential employees, it's at the hiring stage, or contractors, right? At the hiring stage, how much do we offer cash versus equity, benefits, ownership area? Going back to potential employees, you also have to think about, well, whatever I do now, it will inform what I do later with my future employees, because if I give too much now, I'll have to match that for later people as well, because they'll look at each other and they'll know how much each other are making, most likely. So for direct reports, let's say beyond the offer, you have to think about deliverables, ownership. Again, the ownership area, that was actually a big point of question marks with one of my previous co-founders, because we had some clear areas we were good at, but then there were some areas where we both wanted ownership. We had to sit down and talk about it. And then you also have timelines. So you negotiate deliverables, ownership, and timelines with your direct reports, the people that report to you. You probably have to do this with your co-founder as well. If you stop, that's it. That is not it. There's so much more. So at an early stage startup, especially very, very early on, you have design partners, especially if you're in the B2B space and you're kind of still tinkering with the product. I assume people know what a design partner is, but it's a partner where you kind of shape your product around what they are looking for. Of course, as founders, we have a hypothesis of what the market wants, but then you go and find business partners who tell you what they want, and then you kind of shape and design your product according to their needs, and you go back and forth on that with them, and you collaborate, and hopefully you end up selling your product to them. They become your clients or your customers. You have to negotiate with those design partners as well. Sometimes they ask you for a lot of time and investment. They want you to build exactly what they need. Well, first, it might take up too much of your time, and it might be very customized to their needs. Ideally, you want to build a product that's broader, that applies to several other design partners or the market, as opposed to this particular company design partner. So you have to negotiate with them the time investment, the effort investment, financial investment. Are they paying you at all to build this product for them? And then how much customization there is for their needs. So this is pretty delicate because at the beginning you need them a lot more probably than they need you. And then the dynamic shifts over time. Another one is vendor negotiations. I have very extensive experience with this one. I used to work at Sanofi, as I mentioned, a top 5 global pharmaceutical company. And my role was to digitize clinical trials to bring drugs to market faster and cheaper. To do that, we needed to partner with different vendors who had different apps or different devices or even analytics companies. I did this extensively and negotiated $1 million contracts, but you have to negotiate price. Obviously, you're an analytics company, you're going to help us clean up and analyze the data. Well, how much are you going to do that for? Scope, does this data count? What about this data? Timeline, or how long will this go for? Royalties, sometimes they want in on if you go to market with something like a product, and they might want royalties. And then exclusivity as well. That's tricky. Then we have customers. So you might not have a clear pricing. For example, for me, I help founders negotiate any of these. I help people negotiate their job offers, but within that, I mostly help executives as well as mid-careers. But the pricing sometimes can be different because the stakes are different. And sometimes it's also very customized, the type of help that they need. For example, just to double click on that, I recently had a client who is an executive, and she was negotiating with a private equity owned company. And that's different from most type of executive negotiations that I see. They're usually just regular startups or public companies. This one was private equity owned. So the equity that they were giving to her was conditional on them selling the company within 3 years. Like vesting schedule doesn't make that much sense. I had to do a very customized type of help for her, and I had to price it differently. And similarly with customers, you're also negotiating deliverables. They might not be cookie cutter for everyone. You might have different deliverables for different customers. And finally, not finally, there's so much you can negotiate, but also scope. For me, I help my clients, I help them negotiate anything they want, but I only charge off of the financial aspect of it. If you were in my shoes, you might say, hey, I don't have time to help you negotiate work from home setup or a start date or things like that, only compensation or price of the contract. So the scope matters as something to think about as what's included in your negotiations and your service or product. And then finally, if you're lucky, your company is getting to the merger and acquisition conversations, or maybe you even want an IPO, that's amazing. But if we're at the M&A level, you're obviously thinking about price, again, timeline, duration and scope of your involvement post M&A. This is very common for founders where if they get acquired, you've been in hustle mode your whole life and you don't want to work for someone else, or you just want to take the money and go enjoy it. So typically a founder is given, when they're acquired, they're given a vesting schedule of the new company or how much they're selling their company, like usually 4 years. But then a lot of founders I've seen, they leave after 1 or 2 years because it's just such a different beast to work for someone else and then versus building your own company. So things to think about. And they leave a lot of money on the table when they leave after 1 to 2 years, even though the deal was for 4 years. So something to think about very early on. Cool. I'm going to pause here a little bit just to give you some time to digest, but I want to clarify what I mean by negotiations. So a lot of people think of negotiations as the moment where you start asking for things. I'm going to start negotiating. I'm going to start asking for things. The way I think of negotiations is any point in a conversation or in a relationship where you could be giving away leverage or you could be preserving your leverage. For example, in the job context, a lot of people think negotiations start after they get an offer. They think, I get an offer, now I start negotiating. That's a narrow view of negotiations. I think of negotiations as early as you apply online to a job. That's because a lot of online applications have a question there that's like, what's your preferred salary? Or does our salary range sound good to you? That's a negotiation move that you need to be prepared for. Because if you give them a number, you're giving away your leverage. To also clarify what I mean by leverage, think of negotiations as playing a game of cards. Your leverage is the fact that the other party cannot see your cards. Giving away your leverage means you show your cards. So when a company asks you, hey, what's your preferred salary? It seems like a very innocent question, right? But that's actually you showing them one of your cards. If you give your preferred salary, why should you not give it? You can apply this to your areas, but this is something that we've all applied for jobs, most of us. And so this is very, hopefully a clear illustration of negotiations and leverage. So you don't give a preferred salary because we don't know a company's true budget. And if you give a preferred salary, your number might be below the top of their budget. For example, let's say their total budget, I'm making a number up, obviously. Let's say their total budget for this role is 500K. You might have a number in mind, 400K. So when they ask in the application, hey, what's your preferred salary? You're like 400. Now they might be willing to give you 400, but now you just left 100K on the table. You could have, without sharing your salary, preferred salary through negotiations and diplomacy, you could have maybe had them give you the full 500. The other risk is, let's say that you're like, I should shoot for the moon. I should like, yes, I made 400 at my last job, but I should ask for 600. That's what I've heard. I read this somewhere. ChatGPT said, or whoever, my friend said. I'm going to say 600. So let's say you say, my preferred salary is 600. This company's top of the budget is 500. When they see 600, one is they might take it at face value. They're like, we can't afford you. Eh, Game over. Or two, they might think you're entitled. They know they're applying for this role, right? This role does not pay anywhere near 600. 500 is the absolute max. Or they might think, okay, maybe somewhere in the market they saw that this type of role pays 600. They will not be happy at our company. Maybe it's not worth pursuing this candidate because they might not be happy. They're entertaining options that are 600. So you see how you giving a number risks either you being below the top of their budget and now you've left money on the table, or you being above their budget and you might turn them off. You might risk getting the offer altogether, or they might not be as willing to give you the top of their budget because they're like, this person has such a high number, we're not even going to try to win them over with like 450. They want 600. I'm just not even going to try. Hopefully that's clear as an illustration and you can apply that in any negotiation, the logic of it. Why we don't want to give information that we might think it's so innocent. I want to share what my preferred salary is. Well, as I illustrated, you don't, because you might hurt your negotiations. One other thing that I hear a lot is that people say, okay, maybe I'll give a range. So what if I give a range 400 to 600? I would prefer 600, but I can take 400. So I have a degree in math and I love math. And this is a very simple math concept. If you give a range, 400 to 600, you're saying that you're willing to accept 400. And if I'm the company and my max budget is 500, but you said you're willing to accept 400 to 600, I'll give you 400. And there's no reason why I'll give you 500. You said 400 is acceptable. I'll give you 400. And I've seen this with my clients again and again. They come to me after they've mentioned a range. Otherwise, they would have known. This is one of the things I teach right away. They're like, I gave a range because, I would love 600, but I'm okay with 400. I'm like, let me guess, they came back with 400. They're like, yeah, how did you know? But of course, why would they give you a cent more? That is it on this part. Let's move on. Here's how to think about forming your negotiation strategy. This is a very important aspect of negotiating. As you probably know already, you want to go into negotiations very prepared and not only realizing, like I mentioned here, that, hey, you're actually negotiating all the time. You're also negotiating all these aspects you may have not thought of, like scope or ownership and timelines and things like that. But you also want to be crystal clear on what's important to you. A lot of people don't realize that that's something you need to prepare for outside before you even start negotiating. Here is basically things to think about. You might think, of course, I just want more money. That's usually in job negotiations, I just want more money, obviously. Or in a startup, I just want the best valuation, right? Or I just want to give away the least equity, or if you're negotiating with investors. But actually, you want to dig deeper into your priorities, even if it seems as if they're obvious. Here's a list of priorities. What to keep in mind is sometimes you might think that your priority is one thing, but it's actually something else. Very quickly, before we go into this list, here's another illustration. In job offer negotiations, I have clients who come to me and they say, title matters a lot to me. I don't know, VP of product, and I'm looking for new jobs and I really need to stay VP of product. I'm not going to take anything less. And I say, okay, is this about pride? Is this about ownership? Or is it about money or something else? And they're like, I don't care about pride too much, but I care about money because they say I have a family, I'm buying a house, things like that. And what I've seen with my clients, having done this for a decade, is especially in the current hiring environment, title and compensation do not necessarily go hand in hand. We have been taught to think that way, but it's not necessarily true. I had many clients where they went title or level down. So the typical client I work with actually is going from Meta to Google. My husband and co-founder is ex-Meta, and so we have a lot of connections there. They work with us, and then many of them end up at Google. What happens, they're very similar companies, right? And so what I've seen again and again is they might go a level down from what they were making at Meta, but if we negotiate carefully and in a very well thought out way, many of them make more than they were making at Meta. So this is a way to challenge your perception that title and pay go hand in hand. They do not. I've seen this. I just illustrated Meta, Google, and title and whatever, but for anything that you think is your priority, be very careful to ask yourself, what is this actually about? Another example is I had a client who had just had a baby and she was applying to a job that was out of town in a different city, pretty far away, not driving distance. And she would have to fly back and forth several times a month. And I was like, okay, what are your priorities? I want to make the most, obviously base and equity and this and that. I also want them to reimburse my breast milk delivery service because it adds up to a couple $1,000s a year and it's a lot of money. It's like, okay, what is this really about? And it turned out that it was because of money. It adds up to several $1,000s a year. Okay, let's then do our best to negotiate your base salary, bonus, and all that. You want cash? Let's negotiate the cash directly, as opposed to asking for this edge case, which might throw off like maybe they have to go through various approvals to reimburse you this thing that is kind of edge case. It's not very common. Instead of doing that, just ask for more cash. And that's what we did. We ended up increasing her compensation, I think by 50K. And at that point, it didn't make any more sense for her to ask for this like 2, 3K more for the milk delivery service. That's another example where you being crystal clear on what you care about, but also why you care about it. And sort of going down the layers, why do I care about this thing? Oh, it comes down to money. Okay, then let me just negotiate the money, right? I hope that's been helpful. So let's think about this list of priorities. I try to think about this in terms of like founders. What do we care about? You might care about, let's say you're negotiating with a business partner. You might care about just winning their business. You want to lock them into a contract with you because, there's a lot of psychological studies where if someone is locked in, they are more likely to continue renewing the contract, and then you can upsell them later on or increase the price later on. Right now, you just want to have someone sign a contract with you. That could be just the psychology of it. So you're like, I just need a client, and then I can tell everyone else, hey, I have a client, and that might be your priority. Another priority might be price. You want to make the most money now for whatever reason. That's not necessarily everyone's priority, right? So the other priority could be lifetime value. You want to make the most money overall, regardless of whether it's now or later. And so notice how if price right now matters more to you versus lifetime value price over the lifetime of your, I guess, business partnership, those are two very different negotiation approaches. If you want price now, you're just going to be very aggressive now. Let me take a step back. I said aggressive. My negotiation philosophy is to always be extremely cordial and professional in all negotiations, and also very creative to find win-win opportunities. What I said by aggressive, I actually meant persistent. So if you want price now, you'll be persistent on price now. But if you want just lifetime value, maybe you just want to win their business now, lock them into a contract, the chances of them renewing go up, and then you get a higher lifetime value. So yeah, for example, a creative way, if you care about lifetime value, is you could offer to lower the price now, but you lock them into a 2-year contract so that the total value is higher overall. Another priority is building your business track record. So maybe you want testimonials on your website. A lot of people, when they just get started, even for us, when we first got started, with our negotiations business, I had helped many people for free before because it was a passion of mine. Like, do you mind leaving a testimonial? Maybe you haven't done that before and now you're just starting a business. You're like, I need testimonials. Maybe I offered to work for this person for very cheap or for free in exchange for a testimonial. Another could be referrals. So maybe they can refer you to other clients, to other customers, or to other business partners. So then again, you can maybe price now is not as important to you because you care about referrals more than price. Another one is reputation, getting a positive review on a public forum or website. This is a pro tip on negotiating your rent. So I live in San Francisco in one of those managed buildings. I went to negotiate with my building to negotiate my rent when I was looking for a place. And the building was offering 4 weeks for free. They try to catch you like that. It's almost like the lifetime value thing. They lower the price up front so they can lock you in. It's harder to move. So they're offering 4 weeks for free. I, as being the negotiator that I am, I was like, how about 8 weeks for free? And they're like, yes, as long as you give us a review on Yelp or Google Maps or something. I forget which one it was. I'm like, oh, more than happy to. Like, that doesn't cost me a whole month worth of rent. And sometimes you can proactively offer that. I didn't know they cared about that. I got lucky that they shared themselves. But now, since then, this is my first building when I moved to SF 6 years ago. When I started negotiating with other buildings, I proactively say, hey, would you be willing to give me an extra couple weeks off? I'm happy to give a positive review about our building to like Google Maps or Yelp, and and that saves me like thousands of dollars. Another priority could be getting a client with a reputable brand. I have a founder client who was partnering with Amazon, and for her it mattered. I just want to partner with Amazon. Now I can put that on my website. I can tell everyone else that Amazon is one of my clients. I'm not going to negotiate every penny with Amazon. And I think that's the right way to go. But again, it depends on, I mean, if you're about to, I don't know, get evicted because you're low on cash, maybe you do want to negotiate the price, even with Amazon. A lot of this comes down to your own personal values and personal priorities. I help people figure out exactly why they care about something, what they care about, and what is it truly about. But at the end of the day, I don't know your life priorities, like, or your life constraints. So I just ask the questions and then we figure it out together. The other things you care about, maybe deadlines and contract timelines. Those are like a deadline if you have some sort of project, or the contract, when does the contract end? So different things. And then there's so much more you can care about. What I would recommend for you, if you are facing a negotiation, again, if you're a founder, you're probably facing negotiations day in and day out. But if you're facing something very important soon, make a list of your priorities, order them in order of priority. So from most important to least. Super important is to mark the non-negotiables. And what I mean by non-negotiables is, will you walk away from this deal if they don't meet this thing? So it could be minimum price. Obviously, don't share with them what your minimum price is, but have it in the back of your mind. This is my walk away price. If they pay me less, I don't do the deal. Or minimum contract, any of these, like they have to give me a testimony, things like that. The deadline, like contract timeline. In the rent context, because many of us could relate, one way I negotiate my rent as well is I get locked into a longer rate, the longer contract. So I'm like, okay, I've exhausted all this. Like, I'll give you a referral, I'll give you a public testimonial, I'll refer my friends and things like that. And then I'm like, okay, well, can you lower the rent if I sign like a, I don't know, 13-month lease or 15-month lease? That helps as well. Similarly for like founder contracts, you can do that. Cool. So again, list everything that's important to you. Question yourself for each of them. Why is this important? Is this about something else? Right? And then after that's done in a thorough way, list them in order of priority and then mark if it's non-negotiable so that you know what your walkaway point is. From here, it gets very complex. It gets a bit of a decision tree type of complexity. It's hard for me to say what you do from there. Most likely, if you have non-negotiables, you want to negotiate them up front. For example, the job offer context, if you are not willing to relocate and a company is asking you to relocate, you can just straight up say, are you open to me not relocating, or something like that. And then if they're like, no, then it's done. You don't have a deal. You don't have a job. But I would save that for after you get an offer, because sometimes they're more flexible after. And I have a personal example on that, which I can give another time. Okay, so I'll open it up to Q&As now, and how we can help. This is my co-founder, is previous employee with us, very sweet. You can scan this QR code, book a free call with me. It might also book it with my co-founder, Alex. Either way, if you prefer to chat with one of us versus the other, we can switch around. You could check out our website, yournegotiations.com, or email me.
Wow, Gerta, that was awesome. All right, for Q&A, I'm gonna allow you to unmute yourself, or if you want, you can also just raise your hand. But that was amazing. Thank you so much. I learned tons.